the organizations that do the basics well end up getting the bigger gifts and end up growing. And I feel there's a spiritual aspect to that too. The Lord, I think, blesses us if we do well with little, and then he'll give us much. And so I'm always trying to make sure that they're prepared and they're taking care of those smaller dollars before we try to bring in the bigger ones, because I think that's important mindset-wise.
Welcome to Lifeline for Leaders, a podcast created to strengthen and connect those serving in pregnancy care clinics and pro-life ministries. I'm Linda Thomas.
And I'm Kirk Thomas. Each week we sit down with leaders, ministry partners, authors, and experts who shape the pro-life landscape, sharing practical insights you can use right away and inspiring stories that remind you you're not walking this journey alone.
Our mission is to help you serve with confidence and resilience. This is your community, your support, your lifeline. This episode's lifeline is learning how to build sustainable donor relationships that strengthen your mission beyond the annual banquet. Today, we're joined by Haley Limo, founder of Least of These Philanthropy, to talk about major gift fundraising, donor stewardship, and practical ways faith-based nonprofits, say that 3 times, can grow support without losing sight of their mission. Haley, we're so glad you're here.
Hello, Haley. Thanks for being on the show.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right, we're going to dive right in after Kirk says a prayer.
Oh, well, thank you, Linda. I'd love to say a prayer. Heavenly Father, give leaders wisdom to steward their mission well, courage to build meaningful relationships and peace as they trust you to provide for the work you called them to do, and provide the resources that all these nonprofits need to help them successfully accomplish their missions. We pray these things in your name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, Haley. So sort of give us, my understanding, you were an executive director and then you kind of moved into your own consulting firm, helping nonprofits. So just give us the kind of overview of where you've been and where you're going. So.
Yes, for sure. Well, so excited to be here. Yes, I'm Haley Limo, and I have my consulting business, Least of These Philanthropy, where I focus specifically on helping faith-based nonprofits do major gift fundraising. I've been in the fundraising realm for about 15 years now, so pretty long time. I started as a major gift fundraiser for a very large nonprofit in the DC area. Our team was raising tens of millions of dollars a year. And I had a very long list of donors that I worked with. And so I was basically on a plane almost every week, traveling coast to coast, doing in-person asks, doing major gift fundraising. And so that's kind of where I say I cut my teeth. And fundraising was in a very large organization and learned a lot and absolutely loved it. Fell in love with major gift fundraising. We didn't have typical galas or banquets at that large nonprofit. We were bringing tens of millions of dollars, and it was just all simply from all of us getting out there, hustling, and being with donors face to face. So I loved that type of fundraising and realized that there's a lot of faith-based nonprofits, smaller nonprofits that needed to learn how to do this because the ROI is definitely a lot better than kind of a lot of the typical ways that people are currently fundraising. So after I left that organization, I became the CEO of a small pregnancy center outside of Washington, D.C. And while I was there, we tripled our fundraising in 18 months. Again, not from a banquet or a gala, just simply from me going and having coffee and lunch with people and asking for gifts and tripling that income very naturally. So after that, my husband and I moved to the Texas area, and I've just been kind of doing consulting and helping people ever since. So it's kind of a little bit about me and kind of where I got to where I am.
Yeah,
That's
it sounds
awesome.
like you have an incredible amount of experience and you've got a couple young ones. I could see why you needed to get off the plane, but you seem so young to have so much experience. That is truly amazing. You say on your website that you help organizations from a biblical perspective. What does that look like in the real world situations?
Yeah, so it's such a great question. Well, as a strong Christian, I definitely approach everything in my life from a faith-based perspective, especially when it comes to fundraising as well. I think a lot of times we think of fundraising in the sense of giving. Giving is biblical. Of course, we know that. But I think some people don't look at it as the same way that asking is biblical too. I think there's a lot of instances in the Bible where we see Jesus asking us to ask for what shall we need. I think it's James 4, ask and you shall receive, knock and the door will be opened. And I think just kind of coming at our asks with our donors from that biblical and humble perspective is really important. And also kind of being able to steward our donors well, really cultivating our donors, really thanking our donors whether or not they give the gift that we asked for, or they said, not right now, or a different time, or a different amount, or something like that. And so I just think it's really important when we're kind of coming at the fundraising perspective to really come out with that biblical humility, stewardship, but also being bold and asking as well, because I think that's something that a lot of people aren't comfortable doing in fundraising.
Why do you
Yeah.
think that is? Why do you think they're not comfortable in sales from a sales background? Sometimes it's because you don't really, it's hard to ask for something maybe that you don't believe in, but everybody in this mission, we believe it, but it is uncomfortable for them. Why do you think that is?
I definitely think some of it can be personality. I can ask anybody for anything any day of the week. I think sometimes you have a little bit more outgoing personalities, but I've also seen some more introverted people be really, really good at fundraising as well. And so I think it's just a mindset shift. I know early on, a few years ago, I was in an executive director training and we were asked what type of fundraising method we use. And someone said that they use the Manna approach. And I was like, what is that? I've never heard this Manna approach before. And they explained it like, oh, we don't really ask people for certain amounts of money. We just pray that the Lord will provide what we need. And I said, okay, interesting. And I realized a lot of nonprofits have that Manna approach of they feel like they can't ask because they don't feel like it's biblical or a sense. Like they feel like they're not trusting the Lord if they ask. And I wrestled with that for a little bit. I was like, I don't agree with that at all. And when I went back to my Bible and was reading about the Israelites in the desert, I was like, oh, I feel like the Lord kind of revealed to me, like, the Lord provided manna for the Israelites when they were in the desert, but he wanted them to be in the promised land that was flowing with milk and honey. And so I think the manna approach can be good for a time, but I think people stay in that desert mindset for a long time and they're not asking for what they need and they're not being given in abundance like God originally wanted for the Israelites. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but I feel like that's a little bit of a mindset.
It doesn't. It's actually very interesting, the whole biblical perspective you put on that.
Yeah, I have a follow-up to that, Haley. So it seems like to me that you've developed this kind of Teflon skin that the rejection kind of just bounces off of you. And do you feel when you're coaching, or in your experience when you're coaching other nonprofits, is that something you can teach them to have that Teflon skin, or do you feel that you need to have somebody in the organization that's born with that type of skin?
I think you can teach it. And I think it's a mindset shift as well. Something I like to talk about in my fundraising is cultivating cheerful giving. That verse, I think it's in Corinthians where it says, God loves a cheerful giver. And I think a lot of times we look at that as related to our donors, like our donors should be giving cheerfully, right? Like that verse is for them. But as a fundraiser, I see that as a verse for me to say, what can I do to help people give cheerfully? Because I think we all have organizations that we give to where it wasn't a great experience. We don't know if they ever got the donation. We never got a thank you note. Our tax receipt was late or wrong. Seems like most of us probably have that type of experience. And then hopefully we've had an experience of giving to a nonprofit where it was joyful. Like they called you and told you they got your donation. They cashed it in a timely manner. Like you got a tax receipt before January 31st, surprisingly, and it was bright. And so I think teaching people to kind of have that perspective of like, it's our job to cultivate cheerfulness, I think kind of helps with that a little bit, to kind of realize that there's a lot that we can do to make sure people are having a great experience, and to kind of put the responsibility on us as well to make sure that we're giving them that good experience. So I think that helps. But something else I coach on and tell people is that in fundraising, if you're an executive director or a development director, raising money is what you think about probably 24/7, or at least I do. I know I have nightmares about fundraising, like, oh, I asked for a gift and they didn't give it, or so. I mean, I will literally have nightmares or good dreams about fundraising. Wake up and I got the gift. And that's just because I've been doing it for so long and that's my world. But I think we have to remember that donors giving is not their whole world. They have jobs, they have families. And so if they're not getting back to you, if they have to say no to a gift, or if they don't have time to meet with you, it's not the end of the world. And so I think teaching fundraisers that it's not all about you is really important, because I see that's where people kind of get hung up on. They get like personally offended if someone doesn't want to give to their ask, or personally offended if someone doesn't respond to the request for a coffee date, and then they throw in the towel and say, well, I'm not going to try again. And so I think it is about teaching them that like it's not all about you. It's about, the nonprofit. It's about the donors, and kind of coming at it humbly, I think helps.
Yeah,
Yeah,
perfect
and
answer.
you mentioned a major gift versus fundraising and ROI. Can you dive a little deeper into those things and maybe include some of the personal approach, the networking type things that you do?
So a major gift, I would say I identify a major gift can be different for every single nonprofit. For some people, it's like 5,000 and up. For some people, it's 1,000 and up. I usually tell them to kind of look at the cumulative giving of their nonprofit from the past 18 to 24 months, and looking down at that 50 to 100 gift mark donors, and like kind of see where they're at. So that's kind of what I would consider a major gift. And usually when I'm talking about our when we're going and asking people for support, might pay, I always say, like, I can go and ask someone for a gift that I've cultivated a relationship, and maybe I'll buy them a coffee, which might be $10 or $20 these days. Seems like coffee keeps going up. And, you might walk away with the 5 or 10 or 20 or even $100,000 commitment from that. And so that ROI for major gift fundraising is a lot bigger, like average 200 to 1, versus galas, events, and different things like that across the board has an ROI of 2 to 1, and usually a lot more staff time and different soft costs involved. And so getting people to kind of think more strategically about building relationships versus planning events, I think is kind of when that game changing in fundraising really happens.
Is there a healthy way to do both, to maybe continue the fundraising events, the banquets, things like that the centers are traditionally doing and just kind of used to doing, and implementing a major gift strategy as well?
Yes, I definitely never say don't cancel all your events. I think they're important, but I think it's important to frame it in a mindset. So many people, if they don't make their gala, then they're not going to make payroll. And so you shouldn't be in that capacity. And so I think I try to tell people to not spend as much time on it, to like pass off a lot of the tasks that you can to volunteers and things like that. I see a lot of development directors spending time writing name tags or picking out flowers or choosing menu items and different things like that. All things that you can pass on, other people can do, but other people can't go and meet with your donors and ask for support. And so I always ask people the hard question when I start coaching them: are you an event planner or are you a fundraiser? Because those are two different things. And I think that's important to make that distinction. I think if we can switch our galas to more stewardship events, more bringing people into the fold, making people feel great, kind of getting the community involved is great, but definitely not putting as much pressure on, we have to raise X number of dollars tonight or we don't eat type of a mentality. So I think there's a healthy approach to both.
Has AI changed the fundraising game, Haley?
A lot of people would like to think so, and would like to sell you lots of fancy technology that would cost a lot. But I think not necessarily. I think the best part about fundraising is being relational, right? Building relationships with people. And that's like what I coach on. When you look at organizations, or think of the most successful nonprofit that you know of, like national organizations that have donors' names on buildings. Like AI didn't raise the amount of money to put those names on buildings, right? It was those relationships that development directors and executive directors cultivated for years to be able to get those size of gifts. And so even for small pregnancy centers or small nonprofits, you can use that same approach pared down to the size of your nonprofit to get those kind of gifts that would make that big of an impact for your organization by building those relationships. I think AI can be helpful. I think it can help with research, streamlining tasks, and different things like that. But I'm very wary of CRMs and databases and things that say we'll raise X number of dollars from your list in X number of time, because it is all about relationships, and AI can't build a relationship for you.
If you're intentionally pursuing major gifts, what's a good place for a center to start? And is this only for the big centers?
No, absolutely not. I mean, when I came into the nonprofit that I was working at, they had a budget of under $150,000, and we were able to triple it in 18 months. So, I mean,
Wow.
that's a very small nonprofit. I had another friend that I helped her. She had raised less than $50,000 in her nonprofit one year, and then the next it was quadrupled. So no, you can use these tactics. Building relationships, stewarding gifts while making asks works, whether you're raising $10,000 or $1,000,000. So they're just, really good principles that you can use to kind of build relationships.
Can you walk us through how, when you're meeting with a new center, with the, developing strategies for how they can effectively fundraise? Is that something that template?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I love when I'm coming in and looking at an organization, I kind of like to look at it from top to bottom. I think sometimes people want me to come in and find their biggest donor and make an ask, help them make an ask the next week. But a lot of times we have to do what I call like setting up our shop and building our foundation first before we can kind of get to that. And so when I'm coming in, I'm kind of coming back to that biblical stewardship of making sure you're taking care of every dollar well, whether it's $1 or $1,000,000, looking at that first to make sure you are suited to take on those big donations. Sometimes when I'm coming into centers, I'm finding they're not writing thank you notes for just regular gifts. They're not thanking people well. They're not doing accurate tax receipts. And so there's a lot of that stuff that we have to kind of work out the kinks first. Because as I've seen in my decade and a half of fundraising, the organizations that do the basics well end up getting the bigger gifts and end up growing. And I feel there's a spiritual aspect to that too. The Lord, I think, blesses us if we do well with little, and then he'll give us much. And so I'm always trying to make sure that they're prepared and they're taking care of those smaller dollars before we try to bring in the bigger ones, because I think that's important mindset wise. So making sure they have a streamlined donation process, even as small as like entering donations into their database. Most people are doing it wrong. Making sure that that's accurate, that they're tracking things properly, making sure that they have a good fundraising plan. Even as simple as making sure people are cashing checks quickly. When we think about the amount of time it takes, if the donor writes a check, they put it in the mail, then it gets to a small nonprofit. It might sit on the executive director's desk for a few days before they have time to get to the bank, cash it, clear it. And I'm sure every executive director has gotten that dreaded phone call with the donor saying, "Did you get my check? Because it hasn't cleared yet." And so, just things like that, like helping them have rhythms to do the small things well, I think is really important. And then we go in and create a fundraising plan and look at how much money they've raised from other categories, what we can expect. And then we go in and look at their donors and say, okay, let's look at your donors. Which donors are good major gift candidates? Which ones do you have relationships with? How much could we reasonably ask for? When could we do that ask? Writing proposals and then kind of setting them off from there.
And what type of time frame does it take you to develop a strategy for a new nonprofit?
It can take a few months to kind of get, a strategy wise, I could come in a day and give you a strategy, but for someone actually walking that out for a period of time could take a few weeks to a month. And, I always say this isn't like doing major gifts and building relationships isn't a get rich quick scheme. It takes time to build relationships with individuals. And so, I do work with people. I can work with them short term, but I like to work with people long term. I have one client of mine that I've been working with for almost 2 years now. And in that 2 years time, they're up 100% than they were 2 years ago. But it took 2 years to get there, right? This isn't like, let's send out a direct mail list and hope we, get rich quick in 6 weeks. And so, it takes time, I think, to do this. But then in the long term, doubling your donations in 2 years can have a huge impact for your organization.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, is there a different strategy, Haley, for donor retentions versus donor acquisition when you're working with, longtime donors versus trying to go out and find new donors?
Yeah, I don't do a lot of the donor acquisition because that's more marketing. So that is kind of a different ballgame, right? There's a lot of
Okay.
organizations that do that, and there's ways you can do that. But everything I'm coming in doing is for donor retention, right? Because it's a lot cheaper to keep a donor than to get a new one. And your best major gift candidates are people who are already giving to you. It's that person who sent that $1,000 in that you've never met before. That person who sends $10,000 in every year that you've never asked for, it just comes in. Those are the types of people that we want to be targeting, because if someone's giving you a gift without you asking for it, the chances are they could give double that if you asked for it. And I tell people to reflect on themselves. Like the checks that you write to nonprofits that you haven't been specifically asked for, that amount is probably a lot smaller than if they built a relationship with you over a year and asked you to pledge a certain amount. And so kind of thinking about it in that process and then finding people in your database that's really good candidates for us to do that with as well. And, donor retention is important. And so that's why I do like to start with the basics and making sure they're like thanking people and entering donations accurately and quickly, and tax receipts and different things like that. Because if you don't have the foundation, then you can't build the house. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
There any new fundraisers out there that the centers are aware of? I heard of one center down in Texas, one of my insureds, that was doing a cornhole tournament, and they were inviting people, from the public, developing teams, making it really competitive, where the center was seeing people from the community that they never would have seen on a traditional type of fundraiser, and they brought in some big numbers. Is there anything new that you can see that that's trending with small nonprofits to do?
Events can be great for donor stewardship and getting new donors. So I definitely think like we need to be doing different things like that. I think like I've heard a buzzword in the industry, micro events has been huge, like getting some people to bring their friends and doing small dinners and things like that. I know people that are doing pickleball tournaments. I know people that are doing not golf tournaments, but what is like where you go and do golf in like the simulator.
Yeah, like a Top Golf kind of
Top golf,
thing.
top
Yeah,
golf tournaments. People do top golf tournaments because I can bring in more of the women that may not typically engage. The amount of money, though, sometimes you're spending versus bringing in, your ROIs are still not as good as I would argue a major gift to ask, but they can be really great for donor acquisition, for getting your name out in the community. And so I think there's room for doing all these things and having fun with it. I just don't want people to be relying on these events that if they don't make a certain amount, then they can't pay people or they can't move forward in their mission.
fabulous.
Haley, you have packed this episode full of great information, but if you could provide just one more lifeline, just one practical takeaway the listeners can go away with, what would that be?
I definitely think that fundraisers should be giving themselves. I think they need to be giving to their organizations that they're working for and giving generously to other organizations as well. I think that's what we're called to do as Christians, and especially as fundraisers. I'm not just passionate about asking for money, I'm passionate about giving as well. And so I think that's really important for us as fundraisers and executive directors who are constantly asking to be constantly giving. Because I just think it's biblical, number one, but two, so we can get that experience and we understand to be on the other end of it, to know what we like and what we don't like as a donor to other organizations. I think that's really valuable.
All right, Haley. Well, thank you for joining us today. This conversation was really a helpful reminder that sustainable fundraising is built through intentional relationships, not just events, although those are needed as well. And for listeners who may feel overwhelmed or stretched too thin, I hope today's conversation brought both encouragement and practical steps. And if you'd like to reach out to Haley, you could do so at Haley at lotphilanthropy.com. That's Haley at lotphilanthropy.com. And we'll have that in the show notes as well. Until next time, keep leading with courage and compassion.
Thanks for joining us today on Lifeline for Leaders. If today's episode was meaningful, feel free to share it with someone who might benefit. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a conversation.
Remember, you don't have to walk this mission alone. We're honored to walk alongside you.
See you next time.